Hello, everyone. This is Jeremy, and you're listening to Jeremy's English Tips, a series by the Culips English Podcast where I teach you interesting expressions or share language learning tips. Welcome back to another episode of Jeremy's English Tips. Thanks for listening today, everyone. In this episode, we are going to be talking about habits. And more specifically, we will be talking about making new habits. So I'd like to start out by saying that making new habits is difficult for almost everyone. Making new habits is difficult because following old habits is always easier. So I have an example from my own life to share with you today. Now, I am right-handed, so I write with my right hand. I am right-hand dominant, you can say. And a couple of years ago, I decided to start brushing my teeth with my left hand. I have gotten quite good at it by now, but even to this day, sometimes I still start brushing with my right hand without even knowing it. Almost subconsciously, my right hand grabs the brush and starts brushing, and then I realize, oh yeah, left hand. And so I switch and start brushing with my left hand. This is because I have had nearly 30 years brushing my teeth with my right hand and only 2 years brushing with my left hand. Our brain always prefers the easiest way to do things. So if we want to do something that is not the easiest way, then we need a little bit of willpower. That means that we need to make up our mind and commit to making a new habit in order to make a change. Now, there is a relevant saying in English that we can talk about here. It is, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. This commonly used phrase illustrates how the older a person gets, the harder it is for them to learn new things. As we get older, we become set in our ways, as people say. We have habits that we have formed throughout our lifetime, and the longer we do those habits, the harder they are to change. Perhaps you have some experience in your life trying to make a big change with a certain habit. Maybe you or someone you know has tried to quit smoking cigarettes and has had great difficulty. This is partly because the old habit is so strong. Now, you and I are language learners, which means we are choosing to spend our time learning something new. We are doing something that is difficult for the brain because we are making lots of new habits, using new sentence forms, using new words, using your mouth to make new sounds. All of these things are new habits. So, as language learners, we are doing something that makes our brain more flexible. There is a term for this, and it is neuroplasticity. Plastic meaning flexible, and neuro meaning brain. So we are increasing our neuroplasticity by learning language. So you're doing a good thing for your brain. In order to learn language more efficiently, we need to make some new study habits and integrate them into our daily lives. In order to do that, I recommend something called habit piggybacking. Now, piggyback, to give someone a piggyback ride, we say, means you give someone a ride on your back. For example, if you are out on a hike and your friend hurts their ankle, you will need to give them a piggyback ride to get back home. So this term is a metaphor, meaning we need to piggyback one habit on top of another. We put a new habit on top of an old habit. Habit piggybacking is a great way to form new habits. For example, if you want to make a habit of studying vocabulary flashcards every day, then you should pair your vocabulary study with another thing that you already do every day. For example, before you eat breakfast, you study your flashcards. Or after you get home from work, you study your flashcards. Or on your lunch break, before you eat lunch, you study flashcards. In this way, you are pairing a new habit, vocabulary study, with an old habit, eating lunch, eating breakfast, brushing your teeth, etc. If you do this for a week or two, you might start to notice that your vocabulary study is becoming a part of your daily routine. Now, my recommendation for language learners is to make a habit of doing repetitive listening and vocabulary study every day. For language learners, making a habit of doing repetitive listening and vocabulary study is a great way to accelerate your learning. We have another episode of Jeremy's English Tips about repetitive listening, which you can check out if you are unfamiliar with what that is. But simply put, it is listening to the same piece of content, the same audio file, the same podcast every day. So maybe on your way to and from work or school, you can listen repetitively to a QLIPS podcast, perhaps even this podcast. If you make a habit of doing that, then over time you will start to see immense benefits from the practice. It is much better to do 30 minutes a day of something small than it is to listen for 10 hours straight in one day. Our brain needs time to digest the new information we put in. So, I should also mention, it is okay to take breaks sometimes because the brain needs time to synthesize all the new information. So if you have a good repetitive listening and vocabulary study routine going, and you go on vacation and break your new formed habit, you don't need to feel bad. When you come back home, or as soon as you're ready, you can start the habit again in the same way you did before. I have found in my Korean learning that taking a break of a couple weeks or even a month sometimes can bring immense benefits. I have noticed large improvements after taking long breaks. So that's it for this episode of Jeremy's English Tips. We hope you enjoyed this episode. We hope you found it helpful, and we hope that you will be able to make some new language learning habits that will bring you all the success you deserve. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'll catch you in the next episode. Bye. Hello, everyone. This is Jeremy, and you're listening to Jeremy's English Tips, a series by the QLIPS English Podcast, where I teach you interesting expressions or share language learning tips. Hey there, QLIPS listeners. In this episode of Jeremy's English Tips, I would like to talk about repetitive listening. More specifically, how to choose good repetitive listening material. In a previous episode of Jeremy's English Tips, I talked about repetitive listening. So if you haven't listened to that one yet, you might want to check it out first before listening to this one. For those who don't know what repetitive listening is, it is a form of study in which you listen to the same audio file over and over again for a period of time. So when I say the same audio file, that means something like a podcast, like this one, or a YouTube video. A lot of people ask me about movies and television, and I usually don't recommend movies or TV shows because they are quite long. Usually they are 30 minutes, 1 hour, or even 2 hours. So they are not very easy to listen to repetitively. So, for example, if you choose an audio clip that is 3 minutes long and you listen to it for 30 minutes, you can do 10 repetitions in 30 minutes. But if you are using a TV show that is 30 minutes long, then you only get 1 repetition. So I always recommend choosing a clip that is the right length for your level. For complete beginners, I usually recommend a clip that is around 30 seconds long. But for more advanced learners, I recommend clips that are 15 minutes or more. Depending on your level in English right now, you can choose an audio file that is right for you. If you can understand most of the content in these podcasts, you are probably at an intermediate level or higher. And in that case, I would recommend a clip that is between 5 and 10 minutes. Also, I recommend choosing content that has good sound quality. This podcast has very good sound quality because we use high quality microphones. Also, there is no background noise, like cars going by or wind blowing. These kind of things can really distract you from the content that you are listening to. And in my experience, I found that too much background noise would actually hurt my ears over time. So when you choose repetitive listening content, I recommend choosing something that has no background noise and high quality audio. I also recommend that you choose content with a voice that you enjoy listening to and that you want to emulate. Emulate is maybe a difficult word for some, so let me define it. Emulate means to match or surpass a person, usually by imitation. So when you're listening to this voice repetitively on your audio file, you should choose a voice that you want to sound like. Meaning, someday that voice will become your English voice. Your intonation, your pronunciation, eventually may sound like that speaker. Personally, in my Korean study, I chose a public speaker who is quite famous in Korea and on YouTube, and I listened to only his content for months at a time. As a result, when I was speaking Korean, I noticed that I started to talk like him. My intonation, my sense of humor, even some of my expressions started to emulate his. This is the same reason that most children end up talking like their parents. Have you ever noticed that you sound like your mother or father? Maybe you say some of the same jokes or use the same expressions. This is because you listened to your parents' voices repetitively for a long period of time. So you can do the same in your English study as well. And finally, I recommend that you choose content that you can get on your phone in an MP3 format so that you can loop it easily. When we say to loop it or to loop an audio file, it means that you turn on the feature on your smartphone that makes that audio repeat automatically. This feature is very, very, very important for repetitive listening study because it automatically replays the file for you. If you have to rewind and restart it yourself every time, you may get a little annoyed from time to time and end up not listening as much. And if you'd like to use Culips as your repetitive listening material, then you can get the MP3 download for these episodes. You can find out how to become a member at culips.com. So, that's it for this episode. I hope that you got something out of this one. I hope you found some helpful information. And most of all, I hope that you feel ready to make a solid repetitive listening habit. I believe that your English will improve dramatically if you do make that habit. Take care of yourselves, everyone. I'll catch you in the next one. Bye. Hello, everyone. This is Jeremy, and you're listening to Jeremy's English Tips, a series by the Culips English Podcast where I teach you interesting expressions or share language learning tips. Welcome back to another episode of Jeremy's English Tips. Thank you all for listening today, everyone. In this episode, I would like to talk about how to make learning English more fun. Now, I'm sure you all know that English is a global language. That means that you can connect with people from all over the world using the English language. In a way, English is like a key to the world. English can help you to open doors, to get ahead in your career, and to make friends all over the world. However, learning English solely for professional reasons can easily lead to burnout. Burnout means that you have lost the motivation to continue studying. In my experience as an English teacher, I have had students who studied English to get ahead in their career. But I noticed that they would often get frustrated and stop studying for long periods of time. However, other students of mine were learning English mainly for fun. And these students learned much more quickly and easily because they enjoyed studying. So my advice to you in this episode is to find ways to make English more fun. So here are 3 tips I have to help you make your English study more fun. The first tip is don't study grammar so much. I think that studying grammar sometimes can be helpful, but too much grammar study can lead to burnout. There is a saying in English that goes, "All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy." Dull is sort of the opposite of fun or interesting. And this saying means that if someone only works and doesn't have fun, then they will become a very dull person. So in your English study as well, rather than focusing on work, grammar study, try to focus on the things that are most fun for you. The second tip I have is find content that really interests you. I know from experience, when I was studying Korean and Spanish, I often found myself watching videos online or reading articles about things that I was not really interested in. I chose the materials because I thought they were good study materials. I didn't even think about whether they were interesting to me or not. So I advise you to choose your listening, viewing, and reading content based on things that you already like. For example, if you like horses and horseback riding, then you should find content in English about horses and horseback riding. If you do this, I believe that your English study will become much more enjoyable very quickly. And the third and final tip to make your English study more fun is to make friends with English speakers. I know some of you may live in a country where there are not many English speakers around, but there is no need to worry. These days, there are many websites and apps that can help you to find people around the world who are learning your native language. We have another episode of Jeremy's English Tips here on QLips talking about language exchange. And in that episode, you can find out more about how to make language exchange friends on the internet. In my experience learning Korean, language exchange was the most important part of the whole learning process because I became very good friends with my language exchange partners. And because they were my friend, I wanted to improve my Korean for them, not just for me. So if you are learning English for professional reasons, I suggest making your study more about fun and making friends. If you actually enjoy your study, then quite naturally, your English will improve, and as a result, it will benefit your career as well. So that's all I have for you in this episode today. Thank you again for listening. If you'd like to let us know what you think, you can send an email to contact@qlips.com and let us know. Happy studying, everyone. Until next time, bye. Hello, everyone. This is Jeremy, and you're listening to Jeremy's English Tips, a series by the QLips English podcast where I teach you interesting expressions or share language learning tips. Hello there, English learners. Thank you for listening to QLips. Today, I have an episode for you in which I will share my opinion about what to do if you didn't understand what someone said to you. So I'm sure all of us language learners have found ourselves in this kind of situation before. When I was learning Korean, there were many, many times in which someone said something to me in Korean and I didn't understand what they said. However, I needed to respond to them in that moment. This happened so many times that I developed a strategy to help me to deal with these kinds of situations. Now, I know most people say that you should just ask the other person to speak more slowly or to repeat what they said. However, I disagree with this because usually Most native speakers are not very good at slowing down their speech. They may slow down for a sentence or two, but the longer they speak, the faster they will get. In other words, it is difficult to speak slowly, and for that reason, I recommend not asking the other person to slow down. Of course, sometimes asking them to repeat what they said is a good idea and perfectly acceptable. However, if you ask too many times in one conversation, it can be very annoying for the other person. My opinion is that forming relationships through conversation requires a balance of effort on both sides. And asking someone to slow down their speech or repeat what they already said can disrupt that balance. What I mean by this is that if you ask too much of them, if you ask them to change the way they speak very dramatically, it will require effort on their part and could cause them stress as well. I feel that the best way to learn a language is to form long-term relationships with native speakers of that language. For this reason, I have always done language exchange. We have another episode about this that you can check out if you're curious, but basically, language exchange is the exchange of time and energy between two people. So you can do language exchange with someone who is learning your native language, your mother tongue, and help them in exchange for them helping you. So, instead of asking them to slow down or repeat what they said, I recommend using simple questions to keep the conversation going. For example, you can say, "Oh, is that a good thing?" Or, "Why is that?" Or, "I didn't know that." "I didn't know that." These kinds of questions or comments show the other person that you are participating in the conversation, and they hide the fact that you did not understand what the other person said. Hiding this fact will help them to relax and speak more naturally to you. In my experience with Korean people and Spanish speakers, if I show that I didn't understand what they said, from that point on, they speak to me differently. They change the way they speak and speak much more unnaturally. If you are really stuck, if the person says something to you and you have no idea what they said, you can also ask a question about a single word that they said, even if you already know that word. This is a good tactic because it requires the other person to repeat what they said. For example, if someone tells you a long story about something and you don't understand much of it at all, but you did hear the word exposure in the story, then you can say, "Oh, what does exposure mean?" And when you ask that question, it signals to the other person that you are still a learner, and they may gladly explain the meaning of the word for you. However, if you just told them, "I'm sorry, I didn't understand anything you just said," they may be very frustrated and they may not want to repeat what they said. So asking a simple question or a question about a word can make them repeat themselves without feeling annoyed or stressed. Finally, I just want to say that I know this is a difficult process. Learning a language is by no means easy, but just trust that with time, exposure, and practice, things will get easier and easier. The sky is the limit, so it can only get better from here. Enjoy your English study, friends. I'll catch you in the next episode. Hello, everyone. This is Jeremy, and you're listening to Jeremy's English Tips, a series by the Culips English Podcast, where I teach you interesting expressions or share language learning tips. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Jeremy's English Tips. Thank you for listening today, and I hope you're ready for an interesting episode. This episode will be helpful for people who are having conversations in English, but want to sound more natural. That means that this episode will be helpful for people who want to sound more like a native English speaker when they are speaking English. And you can do that by utilizing filler words. So I'll start by defining filler words. Filler words are words, phrases, or sounds that fill the gaps in speech. So the most common ones, which you probably have heard, are and or Things like this, these are considered filler words. I know that you probably have these in your native language as well, and if you'd like to let us know, you can on social media. What are some filler words in your native language? I know in Spanish, they often say instead of and in Korean, they say k. So I assume that most languages have something like this. Now, native speakers of any language use filler words all the time without even knowing it. This means that they are subconscious. These filler words are used subconsciously. That means that the speaker is not aware of what they are doing when they use these words. Therefore, using filler words can make you sound like a native because you are doing what the native speakers are doing. I often hear English learners using the filler words from their native language. And this is okay, but it does make you stand out a bit. By that, I mean it makes it clear to the other person that you are still learning English. So, if you want to sound even more natural, I suggest practicing using filler words and building new habits. Another good reason to use filler words is that they can help you to buy time. This is an expression we use, buy time, to buy time, which means to give you extra time to think about the next thing you're going to say. I know from my experience learning Spanish and Korean that filler words can be very helpful in giving you extra time to think. For example, what was that word? What was that word again? Instead of being silent and looking confused, you can say something like, and this will show the other person that you are still thinking and that they need to wait for you. So let's talk about a few filler words that you can use. Here are some examples. The first filler word is or and are useful when you are trying to remember something. So for example, if someone says, "What is the capital of Peru?" and you can't remember right away, you can say, and this will signal to them that they need to wait for you. The second filler word is It's spelled like HMM, and it sounds like This filler word indicates that you are thinking about something. So, if someone asked me, "Hey, Jeremy, what do you want for your birthday?" I might say, $1 million. Just kidding. Actually, not, but still. Okay, so this indicates that I am thinking. The third filler word that you can use is or okay. These two usually indicate that you understood what the other person said. For example, if someone tells me some new information, I can say, okay. These two words are often used interchangeably. To indicate that you understand what the other person said. The fourth filler word is you know. Now this is a phrase because it consists of two words, you and know, and this filler word is used when you are asking for agreement. Now this filler word can have two meanings depending on your intonation. So if you say it like this, you know, or like this, you know, these two can have a different meaning. When you say it with a downward intonation, you know, you're asking for agreement. For example, if I say, "You know, it's raining today, so we should probably bring an umbrella." When I say this, the filler word, you know, is calling upon the other person and asking for agreement, as if to say, "Hey, you know it's raining, and I know it's raining, so we should bring an umbrella." Now, when this filler word is used with an upward intonation, like, you know, it is used to check for understanding. So if you are not sure if the other person understood you, you can say, you know? Sometimes this gets extended to, you know what I mean? 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 And this phrase is often used at the end. You know what I mean? So you can use this one when you're checking for understanding. Now, I should say that these words are not used in writing, and if possible, they should be avoided in formal speaking. So if you're giving a speech, then usually people say to try not to use these words. In fact, when I was very young, I remember my teachers telling us not to use and when we were giving a speech in school. However, I have since heard of studies that indicate that these filler words are actually a very important part of communication. They are actually very valuable communication tools because they help the other person, the listener, to clearly understand what is going on inside the head of the speaker. So if I say, the listener knows that I need more time. They know that it's not their turn to start talking yet. It's still my turn. Or if I say, you know, then they understand that I am checking to make sure that they are understanding me. I hope this episode was helpful for you. Please let us know if you are able to utilize these filler words in your daily life by contacting us either through email at contact@culips.com or on social media. That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening to Jeremy's English Tips by Culips, and I'll catch you next time. Hello, everyone. This is Jeremy, and you're listening to Jeremy's English Tips, a series by the Culips English Podcast where I teach you interesting expressions or share language learning tips. Today's episode of Jeremy's English Tips by Culips is about repetitive reading. All right, before we start talking about reading, let's talk about some basic things about our brain. When we do something for the first time, a new connection forms in our brain. This connection is called a synapse. synapse. A synapse is a connection between two brain cells. When we do the same thing again, the connection gets stronger. Just like if you draw a line with a pencil and then draw over it again, the line will get darker and thicker each time you draw over it. Likewise, the synapse will get thicker and stronger the more you repeat that task. If we keep repeating a certain task over and over again for a long time, then the synapse becomes so strong that that action will feel much easier. It will almost feel automatic. In other words, a habit has been made. Habits are just a series of very strong connections in the brain. For example, tying your shoes or brushing your teeth. You probably can do these things very well without much effort. But if you try to tie someone else's shoe for them, or if you try to brush someone else's teeth for them, you'll see that it becomes much harder. That's because that action is new, and new things usually feel difficult at first. So why is all this science stuff important? Because you can use it to make your studying efforts more efficient and effective. If you are fluent in English, that means that you can speak English automatically. It is easy for you and happens with hardly any effort. And if you are fluent, then that means that you have practiced for a long time. And practice is basically just repeating things until they become effortless. Speaking automatically is verbal fluency. Writing automatically is writing fluency. Comprehending what we read automatically is literary fluency. And comprehending what we hear automatically is auditory fluency. So, let's start talking about repetitive reading. How can you use repetitive reading to improve your reading comprehension? You can do it repetitively. So, if you are reading a book in English and it is difficult for you to understand, try reading each page 3 times before moving on. Or you can also try reading each paragraph 3 times before moving on to the next paragraph. I have tried this technique with my Korean and Spanish studies, and I have noticed immediate results. The third time reading is much clearer than the second, and the second time reading is much clearer than the first. Now, when it comes to choosing what to read, I think there are a few important things to consider. You should read something that is just a little bit too hard for you. So if you know nothing about physics and you try to read an academic essay written by a physicist, then you probably will struggle. You should choose content that is somewhat familiar, but not too familiar. If you're listening to this podcast, then you are probably not a beginner. So children's books may be too easy. For me, I always focused more on listening and speaking with Korean and Spanish, so my verbal and auditory fluency are much better than my literary and writing fluency. So for me, children's storybooks that are meant for elementary school students are usually quite helpful. Each of the 4 kinds of fluency develops at its own rate. And how fast they develop depends on how much time you spend doing those things. Whether it be listening to the same audio file over and over, reading the same paragraph in a book over and over, saying the same sentence out loud over and over, or writing the same sentence over and over. Utilizing repetition in your language learning is one of the best things you can do to learn faster and better. That's all I have for today's episode. I'm sure some of you have questions or thoughts you'd like to share. So, please feel free to do so by emailing us at contact@culips.com or getting in touch on social media. Until the next episode, bye for now. Hello everyone, this is Jeremy, and you're listening to Jeremy's English Tips, a series by the Culips English Podcast where I teach you interesting expressions or share language learning tips. In this episode of Jeremy's English Tips by Culips, I'll be talking about pets, but more specifically dogs. However, all of what you will learn in this episode can be applied to almost any pet. Now, have you ever met a dog owner in public and wanted to ask them about their dog? I grew up with dogs, so I know what it's like to be a dog owner. When I took my dog out for a walk or to a dog park, people would often ask about her. My first dog's name was Tawny, which is the word for a yellowish-brownish color. Can you guess why we named her that? We named her that because of the yellowish-brownish color of her fur. She was a golden retriever, a breed of dogs that is known for being very playful and pure-hearted. Now, did you notice that I just said she was a golden retriever? When we speak in the past tense like this about a person or an animal, it means that they have passed away already. It means that they have died and are not alive anymore. Also, did you notice how I said she? That's because Tawny was a female dog. Dog owners usually don't like it when people mistakenly call their dog a he when in fact the dog is a she, or vice versa. And by the way, vice versa means the opposite too. So what I meant was, if someone has a male dog and other people call that dog a she by accident, it could also bother the dog owner. So when you meet someone with a pet, one of the first things you should ask is it a boy or a girl? After the owner tells you, make a concerted effort to use the correct pronoun from then on. To make a concerted effort is similar to saying to focus and try hard to do something. So what I meant was, try to remember if the dog is a male or a female and use he or she to talk about the dog. After asking, is your dog a boy or a girl? Another thing that is nice to do is to ask about the dog's name. If it is a male dog, then you can say, what is his name? Or if it is a female dog, you can say, what is her name? Dog owners are usually happy to share information about their dog. And they like it when other people remember their dog's name. In English-speaking culture, it is usually considered rude to forget someone's name after they have told you. The same goes for dogs. So remember, remembering names is important when speaking English with people. You can also ask about the breed of the dog by saying something like, what breed is she? Or if you think you know what breed the dog is, you can say, is he by chance a Cocker Spaniel? Adding in the phrase by chance is like saying perhaps and makes you sound more like a native speaker. Commenting about the physical appearance of the dog is also a nice thing to do. For example, she has beautiful eyes, or his fur looks so soft, or I love how his tail wags like that. These kinds of compliments will usually make the dog owner happy. And after that, if you would like to pet the dog, you can ask, do you mind if I pet him or her? At this point, the owner might say something like, oh, she isn't very friendly, or she needs some time to warm up to new people. This means that the dog doesn't like to be pet by strangers. On the other hand, the owner could say, sure, she loves to be pet, especially right here behind her ears. This is a green light for you, meaning that you can go ahead and pet the dog. If you really like dogs and the dog seems to like you, you can get down low and pet them more vigorously. But beware, the dog may try to lick your face. Some people don't like this, while others don't mind. So it's up to you if you want to get licked. Now, in this episode, we mostly talked about dogs, but pretty much everything I mentioned can be applied to other pets as well. It is just most common to see people with dogs out in public. You will probably never see someone taking their snake or tarantula, a huge spider, out for a walk. So, to summarize, here are the key points from this episode. Number 1, ask if the animal is male or female. Number 2, ask about the animal's name. Number 3, try your best to remember that name. Number 4, ask about the breed or species. And 5, if it makes sense, you can ask to pet the animal. All right, everyone, that's it for this episode. If you found this helpful or have questions, let us know. You can contact us at contact@culips.com or get in touch on social media. Happy English learning, everyone! Hello, everyone. This is Jeremy, and you're listening to Jeremy's English Tips, a series by the Culips English Podcast, where I teach you interesting expressions or share language learning tips. Hey there, Culips listeners. Welcome back to another episode of Jeremy's English Tips. In this episode, we are going to talk about something called spaced repetition. Spaced repetition is a way of studying vocabulary words, usually in a foreign language, and it is scientifically proven to help you learn more efficiently. So in this episode, we are going to talk about why spaced repetition is so effective and how it works. Have you ever studied with flashcards before? If you have, then you probably know that you end up becoming very familiar with some words and have a very difficult time remembering other words. That was definitely the case for me before I found out about spaced repetition. So instead of looking at every flashcard every day, spaced repetition means that you only expose yourself to a certain number of words per day. And these words are specifically the words that are most difficult for you or are new words. So each time you show yourself a flashcard, you are exposing yourself to that word. If that word is something you already know very well, then there is no reason to continue exposing yourself to that word, right? You have already learned it. So instead, you should focus your vocabulary study on the words that are most difficult for you to remember. And spaced repetition does this for you. So let's talk about forgetting for just a moment. I know most people probably think that forgetting is a bad thing. If we forget someone's name or if we forget someone's birthday, we usually feel bad. However, forgetting is a very important part of our daily lives. Can you imagine remembering everything you ever heard or saw in your entire life? There are people who have brain deformities that cause this to happen for them, and they have said that it is debilitating. They cannot live a normal life and are absolutely overwhelmed by simple social experiences. So forgetting is very, very important. With vocabulary study, it is also very important. So why is that? Why is forgetting so important? Well, our brain likes novelty. Novelty means something is interesting or new. In order to make each exposure to a word novel or interesting, we need to forget about that word for a little while and then be reminded again. So we can say, "Oh yeah, I remember this word." At this moment, your brain lights up, you get a squirt of dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter, a brain chemical that motivates us to keep going. This principle is true with people as well. If you see someone every day, sometimes you start to get bored with them. But if they're gone for a while, maybe a month or even a year, and then you see them again, we often feel much more happy to see them. We say, "Oh, how have you been? Long time no see." So the same principle is true with words here as well. Now, studying too many words too quickly can also be a bad thing. People often call this cramming, and this causes indigestion in a way. Do you know what indigestion is? This is when you eat too much food and your body cannot digest the food fast enough. I'm sure most of us have experienced this. We feel very uncomfortable, our stomach is bulging out, and we usually just want to sleep. This is kind of what happens when we try to study too many words too quickly. Our brain needs time to digest the new words. But if we keep eating, quote unquote, then we will fill our metaphorical stomachs, and just like our stomach, our brain needs time to digest. In other words, our brain needs time to process the new information before we expose it to more new information. Now, exposing yourself to a word less and less frequently over time helps to push that word into your long-term memory. We all have two kinds of memory. We have short-term memory and long-term memory. If someone tells you their name when you meet them for the first time, you are using your short-term memory to keep their name in mind. However, if someone asks you what school you went to when you were young, or where you're from, or what your parents did for a living, these are things that are stored in your long-term memory. So our goal as language learners is to move these new words from our short-term memory into our long-term memory. And this can be done by exposing yourself to each word less and less frequently over time. To make this a little clearer, let's look at it this way. Have you ever seen someone on the street multiple times in the same day, perhaps on your way to and from work or when you are out and about? Then, later, you don't see them for a long time, and you think, I wonder what happened to that person. I wonder where they went. And then, when you are traveling in a new city, you randomly see them walking down the street. Wouldn't you be surprised to see them? Wouldn't you think, whoa, there's that person. I used to see that person on my way to work all the time. If you have ever had this kind of experience, then you know what it feels like to get a shot of dopamine in your brain. This is the reward chemical, the reward neurotransmitter, and it indicates novelty. All of a sudden, seeing that person in a new city made them very interesting to you. Even if you never say a word to that person, you will likely remember them for a very, very long time. There is something to be said for these random, novel experiences and how they affect our memory. So when you study words, your goal is the same. If you see a word every day for months, you will become very familiar with that word, but it might lose its novelty. And so it may be difficult to get that word into your long-term memory. Thankfully, there are applications that do all of this for you. One of them is called Anki, A-N-K-I, and this is probably the most well-known spaced repetition application, but there are many others. Anki can be used on your smartphone or on your computer, or both, if you like. You can enter your own vocabulary words or download decks, as they are called, decks of flashcards made by other people. In my experience, it's best to make your own decks because you remember where and when you found that word. When you study with the app, if you can't remember the word, then the application will remember that and it will show you that word more frequently. If a word is very easy for you, then the application will show you that word later and later, maybe next week or maybe next month. So all of this scheduling is handled by the algorithm in the application. Anki and other apps like it are called SRS systems. So you can do a little Google search, if you like, to find one that suits you. So that's it for this episode of Jeremy's English Tips. I hope you found it helpful. Why don't you go out and give it a try? Maybe you can download Anki or another similar application and try studying some words of your own, or a deck made by others if you like. Hello everyone, this is Jeremy, and you're listening to Jeremy's English Tips, the series where I teach you interesting expressions or share language learning tips. In this episode, we are going to talk about language exchange and friendship. Now, when I talk to people about language learning, most people don't understand what language exchange is. So when I tell them that I learned Korean mostly through language exchange and that I didn't take any language classes, they often say, "What? Language exchange? What is that?" So I always have to explain. What I usually tell them is this: language exchange is trading your native language skill for help in the language that you are learning. So if you are learning English and your native language is Arabic, then you need to find a native English speaker who is learning Arabic. If you do a language exchange with them, then you can help them with their study, and they can help you with your study. So you are exchanging language. Now, many other people in the language learning world these days have had trouble with language exchange. Many people say it doesn't work, or it's too difficult to find a good language exchange partner, and I definitely can understand. When I started learning Korean, I was living in Korea, and luckily, near my house, there was a language exchange cafe. So I went there and signed up to do language exchange. They paired me up with a partner, and I ended up becoming good friends with that person. I know not everyone has this opportunity. Maybe you live in your home country and there aren't many native English speakers near you. Or maybe you are a shy person and it's very difficult for you to meet new people. My advice for you is to utilize the power of the internet. So I'd like to first tell you a few ways you can find language exchange partners, and I'll leave you with a couple tips for making a successful language exchange. The first method is to use a language exchange app. If you have a smartphone, you can download the free apps Tandem and HelloTalk. Tandem is spelled Tandem, and HelloTalk is HelloTalk. Both of these apps are very similar, and they have similar features. You can search for partners within the app based on age, native language, gender, location. So you can even find someone who lives in your town, maybe. Once you find someone, you can send them a message saying hello, and you can send them a text message saying hello, or you can introduce yourself with a voice message. Within the app, when you search for a language exchange partner, you can check out their profile and make sure that they are someone that you would like to talk to. Sometimes there are strange people on the internet, so we have to be careful who we talk to. So I suggest reading through the person's profile and using your best judgment before contacting someone. You can also use a website like italki, italki.com to find a language exchange partner or tutor as well. Another website is conversationexchange.com. Whatever method you choose, once you find someone who you get along with, it is important that you lay down some ground rules first. What I mean by this is tell them your preferred method of communication. Do you want to only text message? Do you want to have a weekly phone call? Do you like to video chat? Things like this. And talk to them about how you like to be corrected. If you make a mistake, some people will let it slide, meaning they won't correct it, and other people will correct it for you no matter what. So I suggest telling your partner this early on so that they know how to help you and how you would like to stay in contact with them. If you show a genuine interest in helping them with their language learning, then they will likely reciprocate and help you with your study as well. Remember, this is an exchange, and so it is important to be a good friend, to be nice to them, and to be helpful. And my final tip for this episode is, if you're not sure what to talk about, ask them questions about English. Language and language learning is always a great topic for a language exchange session. So if you are having trouble with pronouncing a certain word, or if a certain grammar form is very confusing for you, you can say, "Hey, I'd like to practice this today," and your language exchange friend can help you out. So why don't you give it a shot? Hello, everyone. This is Jeremy, and you're listening to Jeremy's English Tips, a series by the Culips English Podcast where I teach you interesting expressions or share language learning tips. Okay, let's get started with another episode of Jeremy's English Tips. Thank you for listening today. In this episode, we are going to talk about mistakes. I'm sure most of us are a bit afraid of making mistakes, especially in front of other people, because, sometimes it can be embarrassing, and most of us don't like being embarrassed. However, mistakes are actually a very, very important part of the learning process. I would like to start by sharing a story from my Korean learning journey about a mistake that I made. Relatively early on in my Korean learning, I decided to go shoe shopping. So I went to a shoe store and I walked in and asked how much this pair of shoes cost. However, I made a mistake in pronunciation, and the woman at the shoe store immediately started laughing hysterically when I said this sentence. At first, I didn't understand what happened. My face turned red. I was embarrassed, and I looked over at my Korean friend and asked him what went wrong. At that moment, he explained to me that I mispronounced the word shoe in Korean, which is 신발, and instead I said a very, very, very bad word, a curse word. The woman at the shoe store understood that I was still learning Korean, and so Thankfully, she laughed and didn't take offense. However, I was mortified. I left that shoe store that day, red-faced, tail between my legs, and I vowed to make sure that my pronunciation was perfect before I started speaking again. However, I went on to make many, many, many more mistakes, and now I realize that each of those mistakes was a very valuable opportunity to learn. So, as I mentioned in a previous episode, I have a son who is almost 2 years old at this point. I remember when he was learning to walk. He made many, many mistakes in the process of learning to walk. In fact, everyone knows that probably every baby on the planet Earth must fall many times before learning to walk. This is common knowledge, we can say, and yet for some reason, when we adults try to learn a foreign language, we try to avoid making mistakes from the very beginning. So my advice to you today in this episode is don't be afraid to make mistakes. Mistakes are your friends. Each mistake is an opportunity for you to learn something new. If you use the wrong pronoun in a sentence and you confuse someone, all you have to do is recognize your mistake and move on. If you make a pronunciation mistake and other people can't understand you, once you become aware of it, then you can fix it. In order to gain experience speaking English and making friends with English speakers, you must let go of the fear of making mistakes. Otherwise, you may never gain enough experience speaking English in order to get good at it. So, take your time, try not to be afraid of mistakes, and find some good friends who can help you notice your mistakes and help you correct them. In the next episode of Jeremy's English Tips, we will talk about language exchange and how to find a friend who can help you correct your mistakes.